Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Two Guys and a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston, and across from me, of course, is William Bell, who has returned from Ghana. And before coming on air, William was sharing with us a little bit, a little bit of the quote excitement unquote of his journey over there. Was it all? It wasn't all peaches and cream. So, William, you were telling us that while you were over there, you contracted malaria. Why don't you pick it up from there?
Okay, well, let's first of all, that's correct. I went to Burkina Faso.
Oh, that's right. You had
Yeah,
told me that. I
yeah,
didn't
which
remember
is
that.
north of Ghana, and so we were there for about 17 days, I think, or the trip was about 17 days, and it was, more of a humanitarian trip. The flights over were great, and the flights back were great, so no problem there, with the exception of the fact that when we came back, our flight was canceled, delayed twice. And it took us longer to get home from DC to Memphis than it did to get from Ouagadougou to to the United States.
Wow.
Really. And but the flight was canceled, delayed twice, and then they canceled it. And so we had to end up driving from Dulles to Reagan International
Oh,
Airport in
my,
order to
yeah.
fly out. But we got to luckily we didn't have to go through Charlotte and and take the transit flight. We had a straight flight into Memphis, but we didn't get home to about around 10 that Monday night, Tuesday night, I think it was that we got home, Monday or Tuesday night. But anyway, other than that, that was the flight over and back. Um, we were there to take medical supplies, food supplies, and whatever else that we could that would help them out. Some, brought laptops for, children's education. Books were carried, and several uh, things that we did to try to help the people over there. They've been having a lot of terrorists in the area, and they're, slowly but very successfully, weeding them out.
Oh, good.
And so that's a very good thing. And the country is growing. They're building. Um, but we went to see some displaced people as well as a result of all the um, you know terrorism that's going on over there. And they've been out of their homes for about 3 months, et cetera, and they're living out in the open. They have tents. There have been um, some wells dug so that they have, fresh water and everything, but the living conditions are really poor in terms of, what they're having to go through. And I can just imagine, you leaving the comfort of your home, which is, in most cases, is probably not that much, but, those people are accustomed to that. But when they leave the little they have to go to nothing,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
that really, really gets bad. But a lot of people brought, many things, and we shipped clothing over prior to even going there, in a container and things like that. So that was a part of it. Um, Part of the meeting, we had an opportunity. I got a chance to do a little teaching, and that was good. We had broken down into various groups during some of the meetings at the convention that we were having. And so one group was spirituality. And I didn't know whether I wanted to get into that one because I kind of figured it was going to be all over the place, which I was correct. And but I finally decided to go into that one, rather than, agriculture or business or technology, or something, even though I could have had one for education. I could have been in at least a couple of them based on some of the aspirations that I have. But I chose to go into that one. And so one of the things that they were trying to do was come up with some type of ideal speech, et cetera, that they were going to give. And so we had to give input. And so we started going around I guess it was about 13 or 14 of us in there. And we started going around the table, letting everybody speak. And boy, we had Hebrew Israelites in there. We had one lady talking about, you know, her dad or something built a temple and or had a temple. I don't know. It was something to that effect. And others, were talking about the chosen people, and of course, they were referring to either themselves or Hebrew Israelites or something to that effect. And so that was kind of the scenario. And then you had the people way out on the opposite end of with all kind of weird stuff going on. And so finally I spoke, and I just kind of had listened to all of the stuff that had gone on. And one of the things that I pointed out when I got up to speak, and I said, well, the Bible says the Most High does not dwell in temples made with men's hands. And boy, that threw a shocker through the roof. um, I can't even remember all the things, but everything I said kind of addressed something that had been said. The guy who was leading it was, and oh, they were trying to define spirituality. That was the lead off thing. And so somebody had, I guess, picked up a dictionary, or they went somewhere online and found this new age definition of spirituality, and they wanted to push that over on the group, and everybody was, oh, that sounds so good. And I was sitting there, oh boy, uh, this is not going to work. And so when I got to that part, I just pointed out, that true spirituality is being in covenant relationship with Christ. And one guy who was leading the group, he's actually a doctor. He was Nelson Mandela's
Oh,
doctor.
oh,
And uh, he was leading the group, and he seemed to be a bit educated, in terms of theology as well, because he had talked about some Greek and stuff like that. So I felt comfortable talking about the pneumaticos man and the
yeah,
sukkikos man, just as an illustration. I didn't go real deep into it. I said that's how the Bible defines it: one who accepts the revelation of God and one who rejects the revelation of God, and left it at that. But they threw that one out when they got ready to present. They chose to use the other one because I guess they thought it was great. But there were a lot of people. There were some, I guess, some atheists in there who didn't want to hear anything about.
yeah,
And I'm asking myself, why are you in the spirituality group? But that's
yeah,
because they view spirituality as something outside of Christianity. It's a sort of a generic feel good type of situation, or
right.
just anything that you want it to be. And then,
All sort of like New Age stuff.
yeah, New Age stuff, and then of course there's the African spirituality
Right.
concepts there with the spiritism and et cetera. So that was brought up as well. So I was addressing a ton of things
Yeah.
in that. And when it was over, I knew that it hurt some feelings while I was in there, and that wasn't what I was trying to do. Leora was sitting beside me, and I looked at her when I when I was ready to get up, and she said, "Oh." But I mean, and I wasn't, um, you know, angry or didn't have the wrong disposition. My tone was good and everything. It was just teaching, just giving them
Mhm.
scriptures and reasons, etc. And so when it was done, I didn't hear from them. And then the guy who was leading it, he came back and said, he said, "Man, I really enjoyed some of the things that you said." And several people did actually. Even the guy who decided to take over the discussion, besides the guy who was actually leading the discussion, even he said that things were good. But here was what was interesting: we had a second meeting, and so we went in, and here's the time where we come down to crunch time. We have to get our statement because we got to present it to this whole big audience, etc. And so everybody was in there trying to push their agenda, and I said, well, this is not going to work. I was saying that as we were going. I said, this is not going to work because, we can't go in there as Hebrew Israelites or Baptists or whatever opinions they had, African spiritualism and whatever issues they had. I said, so we got to find a way to agree on something that everybody can, focus on, and we can, we can agree on. So I said, okay, well, I think I gave about 5 or 6 principles or something, like faith and hope and um, uh, just several things in that area that all were good, and everybody could agree on. Well, it appeared that they weren't interested in what I said. Well, when they got to present, I didn't go up to present because I didn't want to be a part of that spiritualism type thing. I said, well, I'll just let them go ahead and do their thing, And I know they're going to discredit what I said because some of them didn't like it either. A couple of people didn't even come back after I had spoken
Oh,
first time.
well, at least you're thinning them out.
And but they got up and they did. That was the first thing they did was that spiritual definition, and they were real proud of that. And I was just sitting back, and then all of a sudden I heard everything that I had given them in the list. You know, it was about to seven things. They repeated every single one of them
Oh, wow.
as if they came up with them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we were just looked at each other at the time that it was said. But other than that, I mean that was fine. That was the most part for the opportunity to teach. But at least we kind of got it in. They kind of now know that, I'm a person that, they can at least consult or will have some input on some things. And so I decided after that, I said, well, maybe I should stay here. And because I was thinking about changing the group, and I said, maybe I should stay here because I might be able to contribute something that would be meaningful to them along the way. And if they use what I had and said that some things were good, then I thought that that was at least some progress. And I mean, when you're in a crowd like that, people are everywhere, and they're very strong in their opinions about it. And it's almost like if you say anything about Christianity, it's like, they're ready to hammer you,
Wow.
as far as that goes. And, they uh, have this thing that Africa and Christianity don't mix, so to speak.
Hmm.
And I'm saying, what Bible are you reading?
Yeah.
I, I said that's not going to work. And believe it or not, the person who was leading the organization, I had mentioned to them something about that in the meeting as well. And I said, this idea that Christianity and African spirituality and religion, etc., are incompatible, I said, is definitely false. And they didn't mention it. And I told them, I said, I'm going to keep hammering that, along the way. Well, they didn't mention that part of all the things that they said to me. They didn't mention, well, the leader of the whole organization got up and said, okay. And you remember now, I didn't go up. She said, y'all did a good job, but y'all ignored the elephant in the room. And she talked about the very thing that I told them that they should have said something about. But
Wow.
anyway, so that was it. So I thought, after that, I said, well, maybe I better hang in this group for a while and, I can do a little bit of good. Other than that, it was a lot of dust, a lot of heat, and a lot of mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't prepare, because I'd gone to Ghana several times and, it didn't bother me that much, except for the time that I didn't know that I had malaria. But this time I got it, and I got it pretty good. I passed out in the meeting and had to have a um, emergency attendant to, take me out, and they worked on me and put the IV and stuff in my arm and worked on me for a few hours. I think every doctor, there are several doctors there, several doctors. I think I talked about 4 or 5 doctors besides the emergency
Hmm.
assistants, but she did a very good job. She gave me a note to carry to the doctor for some medicine. And of course, her number was on the back. She wanted me to call and report back, and I can get a chance to, because he kept the note. But they took pretty good care of me. And so I was fine after being there for 2 days. And but like I said, it wasn't just me. There were about 7 or 8 of us that I know of
Right.
who were in that same clinic. When I walked in, I saw one of the ladies there. But then later, in hearing some of the reports from some, some told me that they had passed out as well and had other complications, etc. I thought maybe I'd gotten food poisoning, and that could have been true too. I might have had a little of that. Um, and we eventually ended up changing hotels because there was just too many mosquitoes in the one that we were in. So we just walked right across the street to another hotel, and everything was fine. It was clean. It was just very nice, and the food was much better. So it was pretty good. But yeah, it was a good trip as far as that goes. And other than the illness, but I'm thankful that I've recovered, and I've been painting ever since I've been back. I was painting before I left, and still working, and I just came in from doing it. I still got a little paint on my knuckles. You might say, because I didn't chance to clean them off, but I just finished some of that. So I've been working hard at doing some things, and was a little ill with the runny nose and all of that, but other than that, I'm doing better. So
Well, that's
that's
great. And it's great to have you back. You know, um, malaria is thankfully, malaria is not the issue in our modern world that it was back in the turn of the century,
Hmm.
in turn of the last century. I mean, most of us know the story of the building of the Panama Canal, and literally thousands. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was something like 15,000 people died of malaria in the building of the Panama Canal. And
Hmm.
that figure may not be exactly right, but it was a tremendous number. And I remember reading as a young man, I used to read all sorts of magazines about safaris to Africa and always coming down with malaria, or nearly dying of malaria. And so, very serious stuff. So it's good to know that you recovered pretty quickly.
Yeah,
And
there was one guy in the room with me, and he had not only did he have malaria, but he also had sickle cell anemia.
oh,
And they say those two really don't mix, and he can't, cold weather also affects that as well. So
okay.
he was really in a bad way, but he got better as well. And I think he was there when I got there, and he was released, I think, just an hour or two before I left. But
Wow.
that's really bad in that case, with sickle cell and malaria.
Right. Wow. Well, and again, it's great to know that you're better. Of course, I saw your announcement that you weren't going to have a study on Sunday because of sickness, and it kind of crossed my mind at the time. I just wonder if that's malaria, and so here you are,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's exactly what happened. But great to have you back. Great to know that you had a good trip insofar as the mission was concerned. While you were gone, Larry and I did a program. Rick Calvert did a program with Larry. We continued a little bit through Galatians. And so we can pick up, and Larry and Rick Calvert went through Galatians chapter 4, the great allegory of
Hmm.
Paul. Uh, and Larry said it's one of his favorite verses, uh, text verses. And I feel the same way about it. I think Galatians chapter 4, and many commentators, by the way, agree with that assessment that not only is Galatians the groundwork for Romans and Paul's eschatology in regard to Israel and Torah and what have you, but it overall it is Paul's foundational statement of faith concerning Torah and Israel and the gospel message and what have you. And so when Paul comes to Galatians chapter 4:22 and following, and he tells us his great allegory, he makes some comments there, William, that have been characterized down through the centuries as almost anti-Semitic. And of course, you and I know that that term anti-Semitic is really inappropriate all within itself. Uh, you're even deeper into that than I am. But the point of fact is, Paul is not being, quote, anti-Semitic. He's just laying out the fact that Israel had her place. She had her place in the Son, but it was never God's eternal purpose that Israel, ethnic Israel, remain as his determinative focus, of his eternal goal. And instead, it was the Abrahamic covenant, Abrahamic inheritance, that was his ultimate goal, and that was to come at the end of Torah, the end of the old law. So, William, with that in mind, give us a few summary statements here so that we can segue on into chapter 5 about the power and the force, the significance, and the meaning of what Paul is saying here in Galatians chapter 4 in his allegory of the two women, the two sons, the two covenants, the two mountains, the two cities, and the overall impact on our understanding of biblical eschatology.
Well, it sounds like that was the summary, pretty, pretty much in terms of what's going on. But I mean, it's just a beautiful story that is used here in this allegory that relates back to what happened in the history of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar with Ishmael and Isaac. But it characterizes the backdrop of the New Testament from my judgment, and that was the contesting for the inheritance. And you had the children of the flesh, which would have been the natural seed, who were sons of Abraham and felt that they were entitled because of the bloodline of Abraham. And then you had the children of promise, who were the children according to the Spirit that had been born anew, just like Isaac was. And you had, the history of Abraham offering Isaac up. Not only, did he have a birth that was rooted in the power and the promise of God, but he also had a rebirth or a new birth from the dead when he was offered up as a sacrifice. And God, of course, substituted the ram for him. But as the scripture says in Hebrews 11:17-19, that Abraham's faith was that God would raise him from the dead, which the Bible says that he did. And so from that, even though he didn't literally die, but the point was, in terms of Abraham's faith, in terms of his intention and action, he had actually put him to death. And from that, the Bible says that God raised him from the dead. And therefore, he becomes a type of Christ from that perspective. He becomes a son in the spirit and shows where the true seed of Abraham would be fulfilled. And that's what the scriptures say from the past. It said that in Isaac shall your seed be called. And so in that sense, he's like a type of Christ, being a child of promise from that perspective. And it just becomes a beautiful story with that. And all during this time, they're persecuting, but what the text says is cast out the bondwoman and her son. For the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. And Paul says, we, meaning those who believe by faith in Christ, are sons of the free woman. And that's a beautiful story. It also shows that the law was not fulfilled at the cross. The inheritance was not given at the cross. That was still yet to be fulfilled. And they're going concurrently, and then moving into chapter 5 is where Paul begins to make the summary and saying, look, don't be entangled in that because of what this allegory teaches. And so I'll leave it at that. Hope that that's a good enough summary.
That's a very, very good and very appropriate summary. And we've said this on this program many, many times, and that is how staggeringly revolutionary Paul's statement was: cast out the bondwoman and her son.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's dealing with people who are being pressured. They, to a great extent, his audience is Jews who had been under Torah. They had worshipped under Torah. They had observed the feast days. They had done everything proper under law. And they believed that Messiah would come through Israel. Well, now they believe that Messiah had come. But now all of a sudden the Judaizers have popped up and said, we got to keep keeping the law. The inheritance is in the law. Unless you're circumcised, of course, for all of those who were Jews, raised as Jews, they had been circumcised. But of course, when we look at Galatians and Colossians and Ephesians, all side by side, you see that there was a tremendous admixture of Gentiles in the audience who had never been circumcised. And so that's where the Judaizers particularly were putting their focus and saying, look, you're welcome into the body. You're welcome to serve Messiah. But hey, he was a Jew. And if you want to be saved by Jesus, the Jew, you got to be circumcised and keep the law in order to be saved. So for Paul to jump up here in Galatians and to say, only those who are of faith are the children of Abraham, Galatians 3:7-8. My goodness gracious, that's shocking. Because as you pointed out, the Jews had always been saying, the inheritance is of the law. That's where it's at. And yet Paul has been going down through here systematically in Galatians 3 into chapter 4, teaching, no, the inheritance could not be received through the law. As a matter of fact, I view this statement, cast out the bondwoman and her son, For the children of the bondwoman will not be heir the children of the free. I see that as his capstone of his discussion of the Abrahamic inheritance, as he has laid the groundwork of saying, no, no, you're not going to receive the inheritance under the law, by the law, through the law. It could not be given while the law was still standing. And now he just comes right out and says what was so shocking to the system of any good Jew, yeah, cast out the bondwoman. Well, if you're casting out the bondwoman and the inheritances of the children of the Spirit, then that takes us absolutely, and of course, the entire allegory is based upon the promises to Abraham. He's never departed from that. He's never diverted from his focus on the Abrahamic covenant, but now he is making that sharp delineation and dichotomization of saying, children of the flesh, sorry, that's not where the inheritance lies. The inheritance lies through the Spirit and in Christ. And I just find this summary statement here of the casting out the bondwoman and her son. I just find that such a powerful, not only recapitulation, but summary statement of what Paul has been building up to this whole time. Only now he expresses it in such an intense, negatively way and says, if you guys got any doubts about what I've been saying all along, let me put it like this. So that's where I see Galatians chapter 4 being such an intensely powerful text in regard to the time of the passing of the law. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, in connection with that, his argument against this relationship, this natural relationship, which so many views want to talk about. They even want to say that God has to bring in a natural bloodline of Jews, Israel, if you please, before he can fulfill the promise.
Yeah.
And yet here we are in Galatians showing that, the two were being contested at that point and the time of the inheritance had come. And so he's saying, cast out the bondwoman and her son, for they shall not be heirs. So that indicates that, this was going on at that time, and we're not looking at something that was 2,000 years beyond and counting for this inheritance to be received. It was ready to be revealed, as Peter says in 1 Peter 1, 5, and etc. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because of so much emphasis on the natural seed of Abraham when that's clearly rejected, in the scriptures.
It's interesting. You made just a passing point there, but a critical point about Paul saying that the time of the inheritance had arrived. Well, just yesterday and today, I don't know how I got tagged because I didn't know any of the people on the board. There's a Facebook page. I think it's called Rapture Ready or something like that. And it's got this beautiful graphic, about this guy walking along, and all of a sudden he's just transmogrified to I don't know if you remember Calvin and Hobbes, the little comic in the newspaper comic. You probably didn't read them.
Vaguely.
Well,
I read Dogwood or whatever his name was.
Yeah,
Dagwood.
Dagwood. Yeah.
Dagwood. And what was it? Beetle Bailey or something?
Yeah.
I used to read those things.
Well, I absolutely love this one. Anyway, Calvin and Hobbes, which of course was named after John Calvin and John Hodge. Yeah, it was named after the theologians.
Okay.
So anyway, he had this practice. He would get in this box and be transmogrified. That was his fancy term, made up term, and be transported to another time and place. Him and his little tiger would go about their adventures and what have you. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, that's kind of my term to apply to the rapture doctrine and what have you. So anyway, the owner of this Facebook page had said, we're just sitting on pins and needles waiting for this rapture to occur. Well, I posted, well, what about all the prophecies that told us that the rapture was going to be September 23rd, 24th of 2025? Well, today he responded early this morning, and he said, well, we don't believe in all of that date setting nonsense.
Hmm.
And I said, well, that's interesting. But I said, here's the real point. Jesus and the New Testament writers said his parousia was to be in the first century. And he came back, pardon me, and he completely ignored my statement, naturally. But then he made a statement. We believe that God's calendar is perfect and he keeps his word on time.
Hmm.
So I responded, well, I agree with that. Now let me follow that up. Here's what Jesus and the apostles said 2,000 years ago. It's going to be interesting to see how he responds. I suspect I'm going to get booted off of that Facebook page.
Hmm.
I suspect that very, very strongly. But on another line here, William, to shift gears just ever so slightly, I've been involved in a Facebook dialogue, debate, whatever you want to call it, with one of the disciples of Ed Stevens, who absolutely insists that the law passed away at the cross. Now, interestingly enough, just recently he admitted that the law ended for the children of God by faith, Christians, but it continued as a law of condemnation for the unbelievers. And I said, dude, what are you condemning William Bell? Because he brought you into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what are you condemning William Bell and me for? That's basically what we teach. Well, he didn't like the fact that he had said, well, we agree with. So he shifted gears, and I said, you cannot say the law was still condemning the disobedient Jew if the law was nullified and void. You can't say that.
Yeah, it's Acts 13, right?
That's 13. So anyway, all of this going around and around, and he just absolutely refuses. And I use that term advisedly. I use that term accurately. He refuses to see that there was a process, a period of grace, a period of transition in the first century between the cross and the parousia. He just doesn't get it. Now, I haven't yet, but it's in my head, and it's right up here in front of my head. There's a point in Galatians chapter 4, and folks, believe you me, this has everything in the world to do with the Abrahamic covenant and the time of the inheritance. Because remember, as we just said, from Paul's perspective, the Abrahamic inheritance would come at the end of the law of Moses. It would not come while the law was fully in effect, because you couldn't receive the inheritance through the law. So one of the things, like I said, that's right here in the forefront, here he is saying the law passed away at the cross. Well, William, in Galatians 4:22 and following, Paul gave a very clear, specific reason. Now, I'm not denying that there weren't other tangential reasons associated, but he gives a very clear, very explicit reason for saying that the law was to be cast out. What is that?
Let's see now. Very specific reason that the law would be cast out.
I know you know the answer. We've
Well, I'm
talked.
sure I know the answer. I'm trying to figure out what we're looking for. What we're looking for.
As
Well,
it was then,
they were
even
persecuting.
bingo.
I
Paul,
thought that initially, but I said, no, he's not looking for persecution.
why wouldn't I be?
Yeah, but yeah, that was the reason Ishmael was cast out, and he was cast out because there was a contesting over the inheritance.
That's
Um,
exactly right. That's the whole point.
yes.
That to me is the whole point. Paul is setting forth these two sons, going all the way back to Abraham. Like you said, Ishmael and Isaac were just, there was this dispute. Okay, who's going to be the heir here? Who is going to be the heir? Well, it wasn't going to be through Hagar. God made that abundantly clear to Abraham. But here's the conflict nonetheless between Ishmael and Isaac. And Ishmael, quote, persecuted Isaac, ridiculing him, scoffing at him. We don't know exactly how far that got. But from Paul's perspective, he doesn't need a big, long, lengthy discourse on exactly what Ishmael did.
Mm-hmm.
He considered it persecution of Isaac. And he says, cast out the bondwoman and her son. Why? Because as it was then, Isaac and Ishmael dispute over the inheritance, dispute over who's the true heir, who is the true son. As it was then, even so it is now, children of the flesh persecuted the children of the free.
Well, think about something else as well, and that is Ishmael was the firstborn son. And even though he was born of a slave, according to the Code of Hammurabi, as far as I've understood, that if the father referred to the slave as a son,
Right?
he was entitled to the inheritance. So here he is in the position as the firstborn to receive the inheritance. And I think, Hagar got a little bit involved in that, probably was throwing it in Sarah's face. And because it was Sarah who brought the issue up.
Here, take this woman.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was a big part of it. And so he had to be removed in order for Isaac to receive the inheritance. And the persecution was a part of that, as well as the claim that, okay, we are the ones who have the right to the inheritance. And that's exactly what the Jews were saying.
That's exactly
We're
right.
here. We're the ones who have the right to it. And yet they were persecuting the saints. So it's the very same thing. The allegory just fits point by point by point.
Yeah, and I have said this on so many different occasions, you have too, that the burning issue from Pentecost on, actually during Jesus's ministry on, was who are the true sons and children of God? In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus is in a home. His mother and brothers and sisters are outside. Someone says, "Hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside." And he goes, "Who are my brothers and sisters? Who is my mother?" And in a culture in which family was the entire focus of your non-religious life, but it was the focus because of your religious life, for Jesus to even raise such a question was incredibly shocking. Well, who's my mother? Who's my brother, my sister? And they're going, "What do you mean, who is it?" They're standing right out there. And he says, "Well, whoever believes in me, that's my brother. That's my sister." Once again, shocking, revolutionary kind of statement. So that set the stage, and even John the Baptizer set the stage for this controversy to the Pharisees and Sadducees.
Yes.
Do not think to say within yourselves, we are Abraham's seed. For verily I say unto you that God is able of these very stones to raise up children unto Abraham, which he had already done, by the way. He raised up Abraham, who was an Amorite, a dead stone, if you please, quarried out of the Amorite nation. So here is John the Baptizer throwing down the gauntlet. You say you're Abraham's seed? You say, "Oh, we have Abraham as our father." I don't care. God doesn't care. He can make children from anyone. Jesus carried it forward. Paul is carrying it forward right here in Galatians chapter 4. And in all of that, lying as the background, so to speak, is the Abrahamic promise. Because go back to John the Baptizer in that situation. We have Abraham to our father. And John's response tells them, well, God is able to raise up children from these very stones, which says the Abrahamic inheritance is not through you. It's not through this Abrahamic line now.
Mhm.
That's where it will be received. So all of this is so incredibly powerful in regard to the discussion of the end of the law. And back to that point, the critical burning issue of the entire first century generation was, who are the true children of Abraham? Who are the true sons of God? And this consistent, harmonious, persistent line of testimony is that it was not the children of the flesh, but it's the children of promise. And that meant that the time for the reception of the Abrahamic inheritance had arrived. And you know, William,
Hmm.
uh, I've had a guy, we've been talking about Matthew chapter 5, 17 and 18. And once again, he brings your name up and takes it in vain, just like mine. But he says the problem with William Bell and Don Preston is on Matthew chapter 5, 17 and 18, when Jesus said, not one jot or one tittle shall pass from the law until it's all fulfilled, they just see a prophetic checklist, that there's all of these prophecies that had to be fulfilled in order for the law to pass. And I'm going, yeah. And he says, that misses the entire point. The whole point is the spirit of the law. That's really all that matters. And I haven't responded to him on that, but I certainly will point out, well, okay, if the fulfilling of specific prophecies is not the point, then obviously Jesus didn't actually have to die on the cross to fulfill the prophetic scriptures. All he had to do is fulfill the spirit of the law. Don't think that's going to fly very well.
It shouldn't, hopefully.
I tell you,
we're in trouble.
it just flabbergasted me at time. There's another person on Facebook said the real problem with preterists is they try to make out that the real issue is the fulfillment of all prophecy. And he says the actual fulfillment of prophecy was never the issue. It is seeing beyond the physical to see the spiritual significance. And I pointed out, well, there's no question that what the physical pointed to the reality of the spiritual. Nobody's denying that. But to deny the significance of the physical is to miss the whole point. And I've asked this fellow 4 times now, as he continues to say, you're focusing on the flesh, I'm focusing on the spirit. And Jesus said, the flesh profits nothing, that which is spirit. And I've asked him 4 times without an answer. Does a person today have to believe that Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected according to the prophecies in order to be saved? Is that necessary to believe to be saved? He's avoided that like the plague. I mean, after all, if what he's saying is true, we have to look beyond physical realities. We have to look beyond physical actions to see the spiritual significance. Well, if you don't have the physical fulfillment, you don't have the spiritual meaning brought out.
Right.
Because the physical was to point to that. Jesus Christ was declared to be the Son of God, spiritual reality, through the resurrection out from among the dead. Romans chapter 1, verse 4. So what's Paul saying? Physical points to spiritual. Does that mean you negate the physical? Heavens no. It's the foundation for understanding the spiritual. But this guy is just almost esoteric. When I keep asking him to explain why the Bible spends so much time on fulfillment, on the terms fulfillment, that it came to pass so that, et cetera, et cetera. He literally has nothing to say about it except you're focusing on the physical. Well, I wonder why that term fulfilled, to be fulfilled, This was done that it might be fulfilled. Here's a physical, historical action or act, and that those physical acts are given as the proof of the spiritual. So, like I said, it strikes one almost that this fella is just trying to be so esoteric, trying to be so spiritually minded. And he said, well, we spend all of our time trying to prove people wrong. And after several texts back and forth on Facebook, I said, well, it's interesting that you condemn debating, trying to prove what's right and what's wrong. And I said, yet here you are in post after post trying to prove me wrong.
What did he say to that?
He didn't.
Nothing, probably.
Nothing substantive. Okay, so any concluding thoughts here, William, on Galatians 4:22 and following? I've got a couple of thoughts that I want to bring in regard to the book of Revelation, but go ahead and give us your summary thoughts.
Well, again, I think that it is one of the most powerful passages in the scripture that talks about the coexistence of both the law and the gospel, a point that should not be missed. And it certainly does a tremendous amount of damage to those who want to claim that everything was fulfilled at the cross. If that is the case, then where do we place the inheritance? The text in Galatians 4 earlier had stated, when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his son, made of a woman, made under the law. And that text is in direct connection with redeeming them from the law that they might receive the adoption of sons, that they might receive the inheritance. And so you cannot separate the fact of Jesus coming in the last days, in that time, in what the scripture calls the fullness of the time, from the receiving of the inheritance. And so, that becomes very, very important in terms of what's being stated here.
Okay, let's expand this discussion then a little bit, because there are two other books that bring out these same entire lessons in extremely powerful ways. The book of Hebrews chapter 12 particularly. Okay, so we have here in Galatians the allegory of of two women, two sons, two mountains, two covenants. Now, all throughout the book of Hebrews, we have a contrast between Old Covenant Israel and New Covenant Israel. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Okay. And we have Jesus being set forth as superior. Chapter 1 is greater than the angels. Chapter 2, he's even greater. To chapter 2 and 3, he's even greater than Moses. Moses was a servant in the house of God. Jesus is a son over his own house. Chapter 5, he's 5 through 7 and 8. Christ is a greater high priest, greater even than Moses, greater even than Aaron, greater even than Levite, the entire Levitical system. Chapter 8, he serves in a greater tabernacle. Chapter 9, he's a greater high priest to offer better sacrifices, and on and on and on throughout the entirety of the book of Hebrews. And so in chapter 12, he says, you have not come to Mount that might be touched. And if so much as an animal touches that mount, he was to be thrust through with the sword or a spear. That's Mount Sinai, obviously. Takes us right back to Exodus chapter 19 and following. But you have come to Mount Zion. Well, what do we have back here in Galatians 4? We have the two mountains, Sinai, which is in Arabia, he says, versus the mountain of Zion. But he calls it the heavenly city, the heavenly Jerusalem. So, William, this whole contrast between Old Covenant Israel being or not being the venue for reception of the inheritance, the Abrahamic inheritance. And then we come to the book of Hebrews. How important, William, as we just briefly delineated there, the superiority of Christ over Torah. But what about the inheritance of Abraham in the book of Hebrews? How does that play into the dynamic of it?
Well, in chapter 6, of course, he refers to the promise that God made, to Abraham and connects that with the inheritance that they were to receive. So um, Christ, of course, being greater than Abraham, he mentioned in John 8, Abraham rejoiced to see my day and was glad. And so from that perspective, but nevertheless, there's this interconnection between them, as he says in Galatians 3, that if you are Christ, then are you Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So Abraham is very important in the promise of God and in the, the contrast with Christ and really any of those who were in the old covenant. The Jews uh, talked about Abraham a lot during the time of Jesus's ministry. And Jesus had to tell them, like in John 8, these that you're trying to kill me. Abraham didn't try to do that, etc. So a lot of that has to do with the relationship and the promises that God made through Abraham. And then when you get to chapter 11, he again brings up Abraham in terms of the promise. That's Hebrews 11, in terms of the promise that Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker is God, and therefore confessed that he was a stranger and the pilgrim in the land. So that shows that Abraham sojourning in the land was not the promise that God wanted to give them. And even at the time, with Abraham having been deceased for all those years, having seen the promise afar off, he was yet hoping for the inheritance to be received. So Abraham plays a significant role in the book of Hebrews as well.
Yeah, and I think there's something, to me at least, something very, very critical to observe. In Hebrews chapter 6, as you've already noted, the writer of Hebrews calls our attention to the fact that God, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself. Well, what was he swearing about? He was swearing concerning the Abrahamic promise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think this is extremely, extremely good. I'm going to begin here with verse 12 of chapter 6, excuse me. For when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply you. And so after he, that is Abraham, had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. Well, what kind of promise did he receive? Because in chapter 11, we're going to be told he never received the promise. So very quickly, William, what was it, the promise that he did receive versus the promise he did not receive?
Well, the promise that God had given him was that he was going to have a son. And that promise, was certainly fulfilled
Right.
during the time of Abraham.
Exactly. And that's the context. Surely blessing I will bless, and multiplying I will
Mm-hmm.
multiply. That's the promise of Isaac that was fulfilled. So,
Yes.
okay, but then he continues. For men indeed swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is for them an end of all dispute. Thus God, determining to show more abundantly to the heirs of the promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it with an oath, that by two immutable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold of the hope set before us. Now, what hope is he talking about? The Abrahamic hope.
Mm-hmm.
That is his focus. Now, watch this. Verse 19. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which enters into the presence behind the veil, where the forerunner, that's Jesus Christ, has entered for us, even Jesus, having become high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Boy, there's just a world of thought here, but here's what I want to focus on. And that is, this is why I brought it up. There was an aspect of the Abrahamic promise that was fulfilled, multiplying, blessing, etc., etc. There was a part of it that was not fulfilled, and that was the heavenly city, the heavenly country, in other words, the new heaven and the new earth. But he then says, Christ is our forerunner. This is the Greek word, the word translated as forerunner is from the Greek word prodromos. And it means the one who clears the way, the one who makes the path open. The first is a good translation. William, again on Facebook, I've got this guy saying that the moment of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, man could enter into the most holy place. Well, why does he say that? Well, because look, the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom. So this guy is arguing that Christ opened the way. Well, the point, in fact, as in one response that I made to this guy today, the point is not whether or not the veil was torn. The veil is not whether the visualization of the ark or the most holy place was present. The question is, when could man actually enter? I mean, you can have an open door, but you got to go through, and you got to have authority to go through, right?
Right.
And so, as I have posed the challenge to this fella, to reiterate, it's not a question of whether or not the veil was torn. Nobody's arguing that. Nobody is arguing that Revelation chapter 11, John says, and I saw the temple in heaven open. Well, that word temple there is not naos, meaning most holy place. And John saw there the Ark of the Covenant. Well, that means the veil was gone. Well, that takes us right back to the Gospels where the veil was torn, right? So this fellow says that at the cross, the veil was torn, therefore man had access to it. But wait a minute. Hebrews 9 says, as long as the old covenant stood valid, and I literally couldn't believe what this fellow said in one post today. He says, Preston, you're just simply wrong to say that the word standing there means having standing. It means literally standing. And he said, oh, by the way, you misquoted the text. You quoted it, the Holy Spirit indicating this, that the way into the holiest is not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle. And he said, you say the first covenant. It's not first covenant, it's the first tabernacle. And his argument was, therefore, while the first tabernacle still stood, there was no access. But when the first tabernacle no longer stood physically, then there was access to the most holy place. I don't know of an argument that could be more self-destructive. When was the first tabernacle removed? When did the first tabernacle actually cease to stand?
During the time of the Babylonian captivity or the Babylonian destruction.
Actually, it was before that.
At the time of Shiloh, is that the?
No, at the time of the Solomonic temple being established and firm, the tabernacle was never established again.
Okay.
Yeah. So according to this guy's argument, what the writer of Hebrews are saying, as long as the first tabernacle stood physically standing, there was no access to the most holy place, which means once that first tabernacle, the literal physical tabernacle, is removed, there's access for man into the most holy place. Well, I wonder why Christ had to be the first to enter it then. He hadn't answered that. I don't much think he will.
Neither do I.
Okay, so this entire thing, and we want to get into that because we want to develop Hebrews a little bit more, but there's another book that likewise has two women, two mountains, two covenants. The casting out of one, the reception and entrance into the most holy place, of the other. We'll do that next week, Lord willing. Thanksgiving is coming up. What day? Oh, Thanksgiving is actually on a Friday, Saturday, whatever. What is it?
I
I don't
thought it was
know.
always on a Thursday.
Oh, that's right. It is. It's on a Thursday, so that won't affect us. Okay.
Don't
Well, anyway.
confuse me.
Yeah. Oh, look, I have to ask Jan almost every single time. Okay. Well, William, great to see you again. Great. You got back safely. Glad to know you recovered from your malaria. Folks, thank you for joining us for this evening's Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio. With that, I will say good night. God bless.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
All right. We'll see you.